Welcome, everyone. My name is Einat. I'm a product designer at Microsoft. Very happy to be here. Today, I'm going to talk about how to use Webflow to create a multi-screen installation art. So this might be quite complicated and long name, and I'll try to simplify a bit. What does it mean, a multi-screen built by Webflow? And I like to take you through my graduation project called Ear Pressure. This is an interactive installation that imagines the future of the Dead Sea, one of the most beautiful yet dying areas in the world, and the installation itself built with Webflow. We got used to website being experienced through browsers. But what happens when we use Webflow inside an exhibition space or any other space that it's not meant to be using? So I'd like to start with a brief background about Dead Sea, then continue talking about the concept of the project, the design process, and the challenges that it brought with, and eventually the installation and the final exhibition it was presented in. So please meet, or if you haven't met yet, the saddest and the lowest place on Earth, the Dead Sea. This is a beautiful salt lake lying in the desert between Israel and Jordan. The border actually crosses in the middle of the sea. And this place is a true natural wonder. And it used to be one of the greatest world wonders, but in fact, it became a man-made environmental catastrophe. Every year, it shrinks dramatically due to industrial activity of the government and private factories that are being conducted in the area. So while driving along the sea, you can see thousands of sinkholes, canyons, deserted and receded beaches that actually mesmerize to look at, but tells a tragic story. And that situation caused by two main reasons. The one is that the Israeli government, diverted the water flow that was supposed to reach into the sea and fill it up into drinking water. And ever since then, no new water coming into the sea. And the second, and the more devastating reason for that is that factories actually extracting the minerals from the sea and pull off the water from it. And every year it shrinks by around 1.5 meters, causing some of these very sad events that you see in the images. And how this is all relates to Webflow and to design and to this conference we are all participating in. So for my graduation project, I wanted to create an interactive story that try to take the user into a speculative trip and imagine the Dead Sea, one of possible future. And I started working on this on last March. I had only 4 months working toward the deadline of the exhibition opening in July. And the process actually started with traveling. I used to travel the Dead Sea, it's around 2 hours driving from Tel Aviv. With my friends and discovering that this is not the place I remembered from my childhood, I became fascinated about what happened to this area. And I started actually writing stories and short text fragments about imaginary sites that could have existed in the future due to the current processes and environmental catastrophe that happen in the present. And the text turned into illustration. And the illustration turned into a brief. And the brief turned into the interactive installation you're about to see. So my brief was to create 4 screens on one website. I know this might sound weird or complicated. And I wanted to create an experience in which the user moves between geographical imaginary sites through a map, and 3 responsive screens that are connected to it will react with images or exhibits from the future. So it could be graphic objects, it could be documents, graphic signs, anything that will tell the story as if it was archaeology from the future. And this might be a good point to stop and explain why did I choose Webflow for such a project? I know Webflow might not be the trivial choice to create an interactive installation with multiple screens, but the fact is that I'm a designer. I'm a graphic designer, and I'm not a developer. And I felt like within the range of the tools that I had, Webflow answered best on my desire to create complex animation and motion design and interactive experience that will work for the user live at the exhibition. I didn't want it to be a prototype. And I actually started with testing some prototyping tool, great prototyping tools such as Framer, but it wasn't enough. And I felt like Webflow, with the ability to add custom code to it, was answered based on my need. And that decision, as you probably can imagine, brought few challenges that I had to solve. So the first one, and the most obvious one, was the multi-screen challenge. How should I build and test the relationship between the controller screen and the responsive screens, the exhibit screens? Should it be built on two different Webflow websites connected by code between them? Should it be one site with 2 pages? Should it be a one page with 6,000 pixels, very wide resolution spread over the whole 4 screens? This is a decision that I had to make at the very beginning of the process. And the second challenge was mapping the timeline. As I just told you, a major part of the Dead Sea story is that it changes dramatically over a very short period of time, and it will continue change in the future. Today, scientists believe that over the next 100 years, the sea will keep shrinking, almost disappearing. And I wanted to emphasize that through a very elegant and minimal interaction. And the third challenge I had is basically that I didn't know any code. I realized at this point that I might need to hire a developer to join me on this one. And the last challenge was more visual and graphic challenge, is that I needed to create the design very coherent and make the project and the interface feel as one. Since the exhibit design is very diverse and very different, because I actually was designing archaeological objects. So each one of them had a different design. I had to keep the interface very elegant, very minimal, and make it all feel as a whole project. And I started with some very bad experiments, trying to indicating the sea level changes over time. So here you can see 3 maps. These were the very first sketches I made in Illustrator, just trying to map out the Dead Sea outline and the changes that are expected to be in the next 100 years. You can see the actual artificial pools on the south side of the sea growing, while the sea itself shrinking, the northern side shrinking. And then I try to bring this bad experience and implement them in a website layout. So my initial thought was to take this map and on the right side of the screen, make it draggable horizontally and vertically, as if it was any map app. And on the left side of the screen, I wanted to bring the index part. So each site the user clicks on, an illustration and text fragment and some data shows up. And this did not work at all. I felt like it was too complicated. I actually opened Webflow and tried to build it, but the clickable part and the navigatable part, and on top of all of this, make the timeline visible and the changes in the map and in the sea level, it was too much and it didn't work. And this was the point, of course, in the process that I felt a little bit stuck and I didn't know what to do. And I discovered the amazing integration between Mapbox and Webflow. So next slide gonna contain some animation. So thanks to the Webflow community, I ran into this reference. Thank you, CJ, Herman. And the reference actually used the scrollytelling technique using also a Mapbox integration. So the scrollytelling technique, which is very familiar and trending these days, actually allowed me as a designer, on one hand, to control the order that things are being presented. Each chapter has its own place, while the camera is moving, zoom in and out to each site. And on the other hand, the user gets the freedom to navigate between these, either by scrolling or by clicking the scroll indicators. And I felt this was perfect for me. So I cloned it, and this is the outcome of what I designed. So the map itself was designed by Mapbox and then integrated with custom code into Webflow. And you can see I kind of kept the scroll indicators on the right side. And the panel, each section in the panel brings some data about each imaginary site that's being scrolled. And the map actually goes with the camera from site one to another. And whenever there is a text about the general period of time, the general area, the map zooms out and the reader can read some more general explanation about the time. As I said before, I had to add some custom code to it, but beside implementing the map itself, I also had to approach the second stage of the process and sync the scroll between the main interface of the map, which now I have it designed, which is great, but now I had to connect it to the exhibits part that I showed at the first. So I decided to try and build this digital triptych on one Webflow page, treating each div block as a television screen itself. And I worked on a triple resolution thanks to the responsiveness Webflow allowed me. I worked with a more than 3,000 pixel resolution. And here you can see an example for the exhibits from the Sinkhole Observatory, which is a completely imaginary site, a tourism site that allows tourists to walk above sinkholes, quite cynical. And you can see some merchandise from the shop, like a hat and the postcard and the tote bag. And each one of them should have its own screen. So next stage was taking this to the most important part, which is testing. And here you actually can see me sitting on the floor at school. I took 3 television screens from the apartment, put my MacBook on the floor, and just testing the triggering between the 2 computers. So you can see on my MacBook, the sections are being scrolled and triggering the exhibits on the television screen. And this was implemented by the developer, and it was pretty successful. The design is not final here yet, but the trigger worked. I was quite pleased about it. So now I could move on to the next part, which is planning the space of the exhibition. And kind of same as I did in the test, just more elegantly, I wanted the main controller screen with the map interface to be on the front and the television screens to be hanging on the wall. But between them, I also want to give a sense of the physical dimension. So some of the exhibits I actually produced and print, and they were presented inside an exhibits table as if the user came to a museum or visitor center from the future. This is the type of feeling that I wanted to create beside the digital part of the project. And the exhibition opened. These are some photos from the actual exhibition. It was amazing. And I think the most interesting part of it was like seeing people understood immediately that all they need to do is scroll, but they were very surprised by the 3 screens responding to them automatically. And some of them needed to take a moment. For me, as a designer, it was almost like a user testing in a way, since it was the first exhibition it was presented in. I had to adjust during the 14 days of the exhibition and sometimes watch user and how the installation behave, and sometimes do some fixes and fix some bugs. So this experience was very interesting for me. So this is the final design of the installation. You can see here, quite similar to the test, that the main screen, the main controller screen with the map triggers the digital triptych on the wall. And each section tells a story of another imaginary speculative site. Between them, the exhibits, the physical exhibits. And I think the most important key takeaway that I took from this experience, and I hope I was able to inspire you to, is that as a designer, yes, we can do client work, we can do brand website. Webflow is an amazing platform for all of those. But the most interesting thing we can do as a designer is to actually try and leverage Webflow into artistic or any other space and challenge the platform's limits. Participating in Webflow conference was a true honor for me. Thank you so much for watching.